And we're back, hitting the ground with some major issues. I have a very special guest with me today that I'll be introducing. But of course, before we get to that, like I always do, call up a friend, call up a neighbor, tell them Facing the Nation is on. We're on Channel 6 and we're on all the social media platforms, the People's National Congress Reform page, Facebook, APNUAFC page on Facebook, and the People's National Congress Reform YouTube page. Log in, share the live, or if you're on the social media. And outside of that, just call up a friend and let them know that we're on today. And as usual, we will be hitting on some major issues today. I have a very, very special guest. And, I don't want to delay today's program because, when we get started, the time usually flies out so fast. So I want to introduce my guest today. He is a first-time guest on my program. This is the first time I'm having this privilege to have Mr. Rawle Lucas. If you read articles and the things, you'll see a lot of information. And for those who studied at the University of Guyana, you may have had to pass through one of Mr. Lucas' classes. He is an economist. He is an accountant by profession. He is also the former board chair for the Guyana Power and Light Company, Guyana Revenue Authority, and even on the Security Council as well. So he has a wealth of experience in a cross-section of fields. So we have a lot to break down and talk about today. Welcome, Mr. Lucas.
Well, thank you very much, Shanika. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation so that, the people of Guyana and those who follow your program around the world can understand exactly what is taking place in Guyana and how some of us interpret some of the things that are occurring in this country. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, my viewers know once I have a first-time guest, a lot of people, you sit down, you talk with them, people see you on TV, they see you here, there, especially as well persons who are involved in politics or people who are at a certain level professionally, but they never get an idea of the lighter side of that person. And I feel once people have that connection, they find something to connect, the information coming becomes easier to carry. So on that note, give us an idea of where you would have grown up, which area you did, and what was it like living in that era?
Well, of course, I'm a matured person.
Correct.
And I was born in an area that we call Pakudam, which is in Princess Street. Pakudam runs from Hatfield Street south to Princess Street. The only thing that interrupted, the only thing that interrupted, the further extension of Pakudam was the Berry Ground.
Okay.
So my neighbor, to the left and right would have been living people. But those in front of me to the south of our house were dead. So,
I see. Very
so I
interesting.
had both the living and the dead, among me.
I see.
So that's in Princess Street.
Mhm.
I grew there. I was born there. In fact, I was born in the house in Princess Street.
Oh, nice.
So I didn't have the hospital experience.
Mhm.
But in those days, I understood hospital experience was quite good, just as good as you would have a midwife visiting the home,
Mhm.
to
To
deliver
deliver.
a baby. It was a very, I would say, stable and gentle neighborhood,
Mhm.
even though those of us who were young at the time
Mhm.
engaged in some of the more, what we would call indigenous sports.
Mhm.
For example, we would make our own go-karts,
Mhm.
and then we would have these go-kart races on the road. You didn't
Mhm.
have too much traffic to worry about
Mhm.
because motor vehicles were few and far and in
Mhm.
between in those days.
Mhm.
We also used to use the bicycle wheel,
Mhm.
and we would have our our road races, where you're
Okay.
beating the bicycle,
Oh, the wheel
the
down
wheel
the
down the
road.
road. That, of course, apart from the competition and the camaraderie that it led to, it actually helped you with some of your physical exercise and so
Mhm.
forth. So, it was very enjoyable.
Mm.
My youth, I would consider to be very enjoyable. And then, of course, we played a very special game. Some people call it holes. We call it gam, you know. And gam is one of those games where you had an opportunity to compete
Mhm.
with maybe one or two other persons
Mhm.
in trying to move from, well, we had the three-hole gam,
Mhm.
where you move from
From one
hole to
whole
hole,
whole. Mhm.
and then you had to do the return journey.
Mhm.
And of course, that was tremendous fun. But it was fun when you were winning. It was fun when you were, you know, taking advantage of your opponent's
Mhm.
talk. But when he or she was taking advantage of you, it was not a nice feeling. We played
Like most people.
precisely. We played cricket also,
Okay.
and um, you know, and what I'm about to say might be a statement about the condition of the burial ground today,
Mhm.
because I can tell you, we used to play cricket
In the
in the burial
burial
ground.
ground.
There was a part of the burial ground where you didn't have graves or anything,
Mhm.
um, and it was big enough for youngsters,
Mhm.
to have some fun.
And clean enough,
And
I
cleaning it,
suppose.
it was well manicured.
Mm.
The burial ground that you have today is not the burial ground that I grew up with. It
Mm.
was well manicured in our days. The
Mhm.
grass was always low.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes you always thought it was green,
Mhm.
and we would be out there playing our cricket and so forth. So, those were some of the things we did. They were very enjoyable days, but things have changed, and
Mhm.
um, it pains me when I have to drive down Princess Street
And
and
see.
see the condition of
Mhm.
that cemetery that we have there. You wouldn't believe it. We used to walk through the cemetery even at midnight.
Midnight.
If we were to visit our grandparents down in All Boys Town.
Mhm.
Coming home, it was easier to cut through the cemetery
Mhm.
than trying to walk all the way around and so forth.
Mhm.
And so you would come through the cemetery, and then we used to have a board across what we call the burial ground trench,
Mhm.
and we walk across that, and we're home in a jiffy.
Well, that's a George. You are describing a Georgetown experience, but a Georgetown that sounds totally different and obviously cleaner than persons like myself know it now. All right. Well, thank you for
No,
sharing. Go ahead.
but I need to add one other thing.
Go
I
ahead.
did have some of my schooling, however, in Mabaruni.
Okay.
So, and while I was there, I'm a Catholic, at
Mm-hmm.
least so I was baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an altar boy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, sometimes these days you have to be concerned about disclosing these things because of the
Before people
reputation.
attack you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I was an altar boy, and one of the things that I really enjoyed was going into the riverine areas with the priest to serve mass, and that was a very enjoyable experience. Sometimes you leave immediately after mass in the township, finish about 9, and then you go to the Kumako, and then we would go into the river, depending on where it was, Obadiah, Maruka, all those places we used to go to say mass.
All right. Well, thank you for that very much. Now, to get into, I want to start us off with something that I know is on every single Guyanese mind. It's the thing that they're talking about all the time. Soon as you go to social media, it's the hottest thing. And even abroad, because when foreigners come, they have to deal with it too of recent. And, people are saying, oh, GPL is practicing, for Christmas, you get fairy lights and all these things. So it is a major concern as we sit here now. For the last month or maybe the last 2 months, I mean, it has been bad for a while, but it seems that it is increasingly bad at this time. It's like every day, sometimes 4 times, 5 times in the day, people are experiencing blackouts, which leads to water not being available and a lot of other things. And we sit and we hear the vice president telling us who has to come off the grid and all these different kind of things. I want you to give us to start with an understanding of what was happening prior to now, and maybe what you think has gotten us to this point.
Well, when it comes to GPL, I have to say that I served in the capacity as chairman for 1 year.
For 1 year, okay.
And that has been the only direct relationship I've had with GPL outside of, being a customer myself. And during that period, I can tell you that there were at least 3 development plans that were there. And all of these plans would have been either developed or updated during the period of the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change coalition government. I got to GPL in May 2019, and one of the first commitments I made, and I made the statement publicly to the press, that for me, blackouts will have to be a thing of the past. And I meant it.
Yeah.
And we set about trying to achieve that objective. GPL, as you know, generates electricity. It transmits the electricity along these power lines, powered lines, and then it distributes electricity to the people's homes and businesses and so forth. And so we then developed a plan for the period 2020 to 2024, because what we recognized was that we needed to be able to take on the responsibility of genuinely providing people with the electricity supply and uninterrupted electricity supply. Of course, from our starting point, we couldn't do that because we met, a system that was now beginning to be improved. There were persons who were ahead of me as chairman and so forth. But under the APNU, there was a plan. In my era, there was a plan developed for 2020 to 2024. And the first thing that we had in there, because we had short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans, the first thing that we developed was our medium-term plan to fix Garden of Eden. Because Garden of Eden had some generators there that were as old as Methuselah.
Wow.
And so we had to do something about that because it had begun to create instability in the electricity supply. What did we do? we decided to buy 46.5 megawatts of or generators that could supply 46.5 megawatts of electricity. And we decided we must do that in 2020. We said we must do it because if we are to maintain our planned schedule, then we have to start off on time. We have to complete the investment on time. And then we continue to focus on doing the other things that were necessary. And so the CEO at the time, who was from Jamaica, was very determined to ensure that we met our target. And he came up with a strategy which we discussed at both our board and even at times he and I, separately, to ensure that we could have this generation capacity in place in 2020. Now, the challenge we had, of course, was finding the money. We went looking in the private market, and we went looking at even some government institutions that we thought might be able to provide us with some funding. But in the end, after we did our computations and so forth, we found that it was easier. It was easier, and perhaps the best thing was to go directly to the government of Guyana and ask them if they would help us to fund this project. And the government understood our request, understood the circumstances, and it agreed to give us the money to buy these generators. Now, it was very critical. The timing was very critical because COVID was beginning to become a problem. And we had learned that there was the likelihood that, economies around the world could shut down. And therefore, production of various items, including generating sets and so forth, could be disrupted. And so, in our conversations with Rawle, which is the company that we got the engines from, we tried to understand what was the best time to ensure that we could beat all the possible risks that were associated with that. And so we went to the government of Guyana and to Minister Patterson, who shared our position with the cabinet, and they agreed with us, and we were able to move to make the purchase, make the payment, sign contracts and everything. And by the time I left in August, the 5 generators that would have made up the 46.5 megawatts were on their way to Guyana. So, I mean, it is really surprising that persons who present themselves as serious and responsible persons of the assets and activities, economic activities of this country, would stand up and tell the nation that the APNU government had no investment and that the APNU government had no plan. When I can give you the plan today, if you want to see the plan, I can take it and give it to you. So I just don't understand. But that's what we did. Now, we had, for our medium term, we wanted to put on another 55 megawatts. It would have been an additional 4 or 6 megawatts and an additional 9, which we were going to put in Berbice, Cane Field Station in Berbice. But of course, we didn't have the opportunity to do it. So, nor were we in a position to go to the long-term plan, which we had in mind. So the point I want to make here, because we were going to put an additional 120 megawatts as part of the long-term on the way. So we would have had, in effect, by starting 2025, no later than 2026, about 424 megawatts of new investment in this country. As of 2023, we would have had at least 221 megawatts in this country. The government of Guyana today is claiming it only has 180 megawatts of generating capacity. which tells you that if our plan was continued, we
Then
wouldn't
we
have the
have-
problem that
right.
we have today,
Today.
because you would have had at least 40 or 41 extra megawatts of generating capacity with you right now in the country. So really and truly, I really don't understand why these
Why they're
guys
there.
keep making these false statements to the people of this country. And then they want people to believe and respect them. How could you do it when you could blatantly look at somebody in the eye and mislead them?
Yeah.
And that is not your role as a government. Your role as a government is to serve the people.
Correct.
And therefore to deliver to them
The services.
the best services and the best information that you have.
I mean, you just give us a breakdown of from your period coming in, which was what we will say a short timing. And you basically talked about probably 5 generators coming in during that period to be delivered, I guess by 2020. And I note on the minister's page that he says in all from 2015 to 2020, they would have gotten 9 new generators. And I mean, any Guyanese sitting, living in this country can tell you, you know, when you experience something, it's totally different from when somebody sits and just talks. But Guyanese experience a better time under the coalition in terms of electricity. I mean, coming down to, I would say, about 2017, 2018 period, you were forgetting that you had blackouts. It was that rare, unless there was a major issue or something happening, then you would experience it. And for us to, in 3 years, just over 3 years, and you're experiencing blackout at the rate of 3 to 4 times a day. And according to the young people, they got all these things we put out. Soon as the wind blows, we're back to blackouts, and we hear the kind of things that are being said. I mean, yesterday on the VP in one of his statements basically said that they have plans for everything. The opposition, of course, in time in government, we had no plans. And, if you want to know any plan currently, just come to him with his sector and he will tell us. Basically, off his head, he can tell us all of the plans that we have. What's your take on that statement before we move on to the other things I want to talk about?
Well, I mean, it's somebody who obviously, thinks a lot about themselves, because I can't imagine why it is that as citizens of a country who are paying taxes in a country cannot get information that their money is funding, particularly information that is not of a sensitive or critical security nature. Anybody who wants to know about electricity generation in the country ought to be able to get access to that information. So it should not be dependent upon the whims and fancies of an individual.
Correct.
Telling the people of what information they could get or what they should.
And when and how.
Yeah, because one of the things that is happening in this country is the government believes that it is an institution, one of the 5 institutions in this country, that is superior to every other institution. And it does not have an obligation to respect the requests and wishes of the other 4 institutions. Because you have households, which are you and I and our families, but then you have financial businesses, non-financial businesses, you have non-profit institutions, and you have the government. Government is only one of 5 institutions, and it is required, like every other institution, to follow whatever law it decides it's going to put in place. So until the government takes part of its responsibility and go and change that law, it has to respect it. It has to follow it just like everybody else. So when we need information, the government has to give it to us.
Correct.
What I don't understand is why it is that people in this country sit around believing that only the government has the right to determine certain things. If you don't make certain
Hold them
demands,
accountable.
they will
Do
continue
whatever.
to ride roughshod over you.
Mhm.
But so you find that the government wakes up one morning and does something, and then you want to know
How does it fit in?
how it
What
happened.
happened?
Yeah. You know, even digging up people's graves, and you want to know what happened.
You know, you mentioned that most persons between last night and this morning would have seen the video from the visit of the leader of the opposition and a team as they visit Rosignol to talk to family members who, in my head, it is like, it is unbelievable that you can think to do something like that. And even further on the scale in which you've done it, and if what persons are saying is the reason for it being done, for them to get material to do some sort of contract work, it leaves you in a place of, how can you pull up soil from a bearing ground and think to use it for any project outside. And on top of that, you did that without any care or concern for the feelings of those relatives who would have. One of the persons basically they had a family member who was buried about 2 weeks ago. We're talking about some recent bodies as well. One man talked about a family member being buried about 2 months back. And this has happened, and it said that that person is linked to a high ranking government official. But I want to remind people that this is not the first time that we have seen an incident like this. This may have been on a
And they
larger
got to
scale
come
because
every day.
if the count that
Yes,
the
and they
persons are
got me
giving,
uncle
you're
there,
talking about
Mohammed Yusuf,
almost
and then they got me
50
Auntie
graves
Dali.
being
You could
removed.
see that them pile where
But
he
in
drive down
Pleasance,
on
a
his
few
on the
years
earth,
back
and
under
he
the
take out
PPP government as well, we saw
them
the
black.
same thing happening.
Because
And again,
on Irish
it was someone
showdown
affiliated
2015,
very highly with
nobody
the
know him for
government
Samuel.
who
Why?
decided that he was going to
People
dig
stand
out
up
the
on them
front
that we
of the
mean
grave
this thing will
and
bring
place a building
Guyana,
there.
I
A
could damage the
building
road.
which
Then
if
we know the road.
persons on the East Coast know that
So
there were
we stand
lots of
up for
trouble
them that we mean
in
no
all
you know
those
make two
buildings
Samuel
that were
today.
created along
So the
that
man
plot.
see and show
Seems
Abby
to
this that
have,
we mean you can invade the
lulled
Bengal.
now. But what are your thoughts on that? How does a
Yes,
government permit?
yes,
Because
sir.
mind you, I'm
Yes,
saying a
sir.
government permit.
Good
This is a
afternoon. Actually,
contractor
I'm
who
here
did
because
this.
I'm very
But these
emotionally
persons
disturbed
have been
since I got the
complaining
news when we sent somebody
for
to look for
quite
my
some
mother's
time. From the
grave, and it
first
has
time it
been
happened,
desecrated,
they would have
and I
approached
cannot
the
sleep. It's
government
People help us,
several
these
times
poor
to
people,
deal with it, and
Right?
nothing happened.
And this is what this
I
man do here,
believe we're
sir.
hearing
Seeing that our
last
beloved one is
night
not here anymore
they
until
started
we can't
refilling the
come back and
place
do
after
nothing
the
for we loved
opposition
one
leader
and
visit.
nothing
What
else.
are your
That you
thoughts
can do
on that?
memorial.
Well,
Or in a
I'll tell you
road month that
something.
we mean you come to raise your hand and do and to walk.
Remember, as
Or
I
pay
said,
on a mother's
part of my youth was living opposite
A burial.
America, the major cemetery in this country, at least in Georgia.
Yeah.
And you know, when you have that kind of experience, you also get the opportunity to witness some personal grieving by people. And I can tell you, there was a particular individual who, for years, I would say to you, for at least 5 years, every day on his way to work and on his way back home, he would stop at an area close to where his wife was buried, and that person would sit there and, I don't know, contemplate whatever it is, mourn, whatever, grieve, whatever, every day. So it tells you that even though the burial ground is a place of rest, a final place of rest for many, it is still also a place that persons get some
And if
solace
this-
when they have this kind of situation. So to hear that burial grounds are being
Basically,
disturbed,
and we got to
it
come every
is
day.
it disturbs me
Yes, and they got me
because
uncle
I
there,
don't believe
Mohammed Yusuf,
it
and then
reflects
they
the
got me Auntie
sensitivity
Dali.
that
Then dig me uncle out and dig me
people
Auntie
should have
Dali from
for
Planting Rock.
persons
Me
who
gotta
have
come
lost
every day
loved ones.
of the
So
background to
that
make sure
story,
then I dig my
like
father,
the Pleasance
stability person,
experience, the
and me got to
Rossignol
come every day.
experience, they
Yes,
all,
and they got me uncle there,
make me
Mohammed
feel sad.
Yusuf.
And then I look at the condition of the cemetery here in Georgetown. I mean, it is just too much sometimes to look at, knowing what it used to be before.
I want us to talk a little about the economic situation in the country. I know you can take it from a much more technical level than I can imagine, or maybe even our viewers. But the thing is, the government quite often like to talk about who knows economics and who doesn't, etc. And you're having all these statistics coming out saying that there is an increase in this and that. But at the same time, we hear people complaining about things like not having a job, the unemployment rate being high, persons not being able to afford some basic items in the market. I mean, you visit the market, it is, mind blowing. Sometimes you went one time to get something and you get back, and when you go there and you realize the price, you begin to think, what can I subtract now from my main supplements to be able to afford to feed your family? And for most Guyanese, it's that serious, because a lot of the times people have to then decide today, we will just not be having this thing or that thing. And there is increase in transportation. I mean, even in the drink sector. I mean, last week we heard banks raised a lot of their items, etc. And we are not hearing any of all this, the largest budget ever presented. They're coming with supplemental budgets. I think we're almost at $1 trillion dollars at this point, based on supplementary budgets as well. And persons are wondering where this money is going to. How do we deal with this situation? Give us a sums up what you think about how the economy is running and how it can directly impact, and what you think should be done at this point.
Well, I'm still doing some research on some elements of the economy and so forth. But I want to refer to current experience. In August, just before I left on vacation, I went to the market to buy coconut water. The price was $1,300 for, I think it's a 1.5 liter bottle of coconut water. When I came back and I went to buy coconut water, because it's something I like to drink, the price was $1,500. And I came back sometime in the middle of September. A week after, I went back to buy, and the price had gone to $1,700.
Wow.
So between August and September, the end of September, the price had moved nearly 21%. If you look at the half-year report that the government has put out, one of the things that has contributed to what we're seeing as growth in the other crop sector in Guyana is coconut production. 77%
Wow.
increase from half year last year to half year this year. 77% increase. Now, if that is supposed to represent a massive expansion of availability
Mm-hmm.
of coconuts for coconut water,
Mm-hmm.
then why is it that the price
It's
is
just
moving, has gone up 31%
Mm-hmm.
in, at least from my experience, in the space of 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it tells you that something is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And if you were to look again at the half-year report,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see, even though you've had growth in a number of areas,
Mm-hmm.
the rate of growth has been much slower in this half year than it was last year.
Okay.
So you might have had, for example, the other crops industry growing by about 24% or 30%
Mm-hmm.
last year. But if you look this year, it's probably grown maybe by 12% or something
Mm-hmm.
in the first half of the year. And there are about 9 or 11 industries like that in Guyana. When you look at how they construct the data
Mm-hmm.
um, for the economy, there are about 28 industries that are identified in the various sectors
Mm-hmm.
of the economy: agriculture, mining and quarry, and manufacturing, services, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have about 28. Some industries double as both sector and industry, like electricity, construction, water, and so forth.
Okay.
But there are 28 plus government would make it 29, meaning public administration.
Mm-hmm.
That would make it 29. But if you're looking at industries that are primarily private sector industries, you would probably find about 28, with the exception, of course, of water, electricity, sugar,
Because that's provided by
because that's
government
is the
agencies.
major investor
Mm-hmm.
in those. Healthcare and education, they are, a portion is government and a portion is private sector. But if you look at it,
Mm-hmm.
what you see is that most of 9 or 11 of those industries have slower growth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's telling you that even though the output might have increased,
Mm-hmm.
it's increasing at a slower rate.
Slower rate.
Right. Which may not necessarily be matching exports and domestic demand for those goods.
Mm-hmm.
And the coconut water is a clear example
Mm-hmm.
of that.
Mm-hmm.
There are other areas and so forth. So you have to ask, therefore, what might be creating this problem? At least one of the things that I see is that the government is not allowing competition
In the
in
market.
the market.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, yeah, we are very sorry for the break in the transmission. You know, we're talking about GPL, and GPL is giving us the works, of course. Um, so we were wrapping up on the conversation of the economic situation, and I believe you were heading to what you believe may help to solve the issues that we're having in that regard.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that if there was competition,
Yeah.
meaning
Hmm.
if there was greater opportunity for more people to participate in the productive sectors of the economy on an equal footing,
Hmm.
without government interfering with the ability of people to actually produce, participate in various sectors of the economy, things would be much better. But
Hmm.
as you know, um, this government has a habit of, selecting whom it wants to
Hmm.
be part of any part of the production structure
Hmm.
of this country, which clearly would not benefit the economy. We all know we want to talk about a market economy in Guyana, but Guyana, in the truest sense of the word, does not have, a market economy because there's way too much government
Government.
interference.
Hmm.
And so the invisible hand in our market is the government,
Government.
not the one that Adam Smith talked about
Hmm.
and so forth. So to me, that's a major challenge. And so unless we are, you know, enabled or allowed
Hmm.
to engage in the production that we want, then of course you have the problem of finance,
Hmm.
access to
Finance.
finance.
Hmm.
Now, we have the stock market
Hmm.
that larger companies could use if they want to, but they don't use it.
Hmm.
At least I haven't seen any of them um, use that market to generate revenues for themselves, because the stock market is really a secondary market,
Hmm.
one in which might be shareholders in a company want to sell our shares
Hmm.
and to get some money and so forth. But the issuers of the shares, they themselves are not necessarily going to the stock market.
Hmm.
They have their own special arrangements,
Arrangements
and
with the
they
bank.
not only with the banks, but with whomever they want to um, encourage to buy the shares. So they
Hmm.
may decide, look, I want to sell shares to these 3, 4, 5 investors because
Okay.
they're my
Okay.
friends,
Hmm.
or persons who we think have money
Hmm.
and can help us to raise the capital we need. That's where they would go. And
Okay.
that. But there's a vast segment of the economy, particularly the small and medium-sized businesses
Hmm.
that don't have that similar opportunity as others. And so I think there are models where you can use a different set of criteria in order to gain access to finance. I know the British, they have a system like that allows any individual who wants to support investment in the small and medium scale enterprises. The government gives special incentives for them to do that
Hmm.
so that the smaller players can have access to the capital that they ordinarily might not be able to qualify for at a bank and so forth. The other thing that you know we might want to consider, apart from these small loans that we give out from time to time,
Hmm.
um, um, you know, is to create what I would consider to be, um, a special fund,
Okay.
a special financing and development fund. I mean, I've always advocated the view that we should have what I call a village development fund.
Okay.
Just like you might have a Inter-American Development Bank having a development fund, I'm saying that we in this country can create a fund that would enable entrepreneurs from our villages and so forth to be able to tap into that money to make whatever investments they want to make for themselves and their future.
All right. So we, as you know, like I said when we started, usually the time goes so fast, and we're basically out of time. But we took some more time because we had that break, talking about GPL, and I guess GPL decided, you know what, we're gonna shut y'all down for a moment. However, but we're back on, of course. Tying up everything, we talked about how the electricity is distributed, and what we're seeing is a lack of planning in regards to GPL over the last 3 years. I mean, even being left with a plan there that they could have worked with to increase. And, when you have that, we discuss how it affects many sectors. It's all faceted, and citizens as well bear the blunt of these kind of things. I know we saw persons going on Facebook and talking about their losses for their business. The man talked about all the stuff that he bought, and because of the long spell of blackout, he basically lost half of his goods. So we have these things happening. We talked about the economy as well, and how it's going, how those numbers are pushing despite all this wealth creation that we're talking about coming from the newfound oil sector. And we're seeing different persons being touched in all sectors as we deal with this. How do you feel this one Guyana mantra that is being peddled everywhere you go? There's a big signboard, there's a writing here, there's a blue flag here, everything, it's as if we have changed the motto of our country from one people, one nation, one destiny to one Guyana. And we are not seeing, at least in my view, I want your view here, that so-called mantra being effective across the board, basically for what we would call all people, if it was to mean that. What is your take about that one Guyana mantra when it fits in between all the things that we've discussed here today?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one thing. To me, one Guyana starts with a wrong assumption. It starts on the assumption that everyone in this country is satisfied with the social and economic conditions or starting point that the addition of oil and gas to our production structure may have created. The other thing is that it assumes that everyone understands what each community that makes up this country needs. And that is not true. Now, while the concept has been projected by the government to be a social contract of inclusion, to my mind, it has gone about ensuring that division and deception are the means to achieving this end of one Guyana. For example, an example of this destructive approach to development is the placement of current economic interests over persons who held long-standing status over, for example, land and other assets. You have the examples of Mooka, you have Success, you have Hillfoot or Foothill, or whatever it is. You have Jetty. And, so what you're seeing is a level of insensitivity to the needs of the people of this country. Another example is really its refusal to let the institutions of government function properly. And I mean, the most classic example is the Public Accounts Committee, where the government has changed the rules in relation to the quorum and the membership of the Public Accounts Committee. And my understanding is, since then, the Public Accounts Committee could not hold another meeting. So there were 15 sessions that have been, postponed or canceled as a result of the intransigence. In my view, it's the intransigence and disrespect that the government has for, oversight and accountability. And we can see it in the case of this audit sum.
We didn't never get to really touch on that.
That audit sum, which all of a sudden moved from 214 million US dollars to 3 million US dollars. Now, if there was proper oversight and accountability by those who claim to be, capable of doing this, and that includes all those who call themselves ministers and vice presidents.
Correct.
If they could not see after November 2022, when Mr. Gosai told the government minister that this thing had moved from 214 to 3 million, and if, as far as they know, they didn't give any authority for that to happen, then how come, in July of this year, Mr. Gosai could be repeating this thing, to these two senior government officials? So it shows that there is an unwillingness of this government to allow the institutions of government to work, particularly where they relate to oversight and accountability. And that, to me, is a very unfortunate situation. And why it's unfortunate is because it's the people's money that is not being spent efficiently and properly. And you're asking why I am upset that I'm not enjoying or experiencing this oil wealth? Well, think about that. Think about how your money is actually being managed and, what the level of accountability is with respect to that money. Because we might have caught, thanks to the press, we might have caught the 214, figure that was about to disappear. The press was able to deal with that. But what about all those other things
that you don't have scrutiny over?
Including contracts that are being given out to friends, families, and favorites. So until this government is prepared to submit itself to proper scrutiny, I don't think anybody would take the one Guyana seriously. The other thing that you have there, and in my view, the most glaring fault of this concept, surrounds the notion that the interests of descendants of indigenous, enslaved, and indentured Guyanese can and must be equated with those of others, particularly the newcomers. Our experiences are different, and they have an impact on our outlook on life. So consequently, to my mind, one Guyana ignores our history, our cultures, and our ambitions. It also, in my view, does not take seriously the security threats that face this country, and the fact that it is the descendants of indigenous, enslaved, and indentured Guyanese who will have to defend this country against all threats. It fails to create, in my view, a competitive environment for growth and development. And it shows no interest in encouraging innovation in culture and industry in this country. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a slogan that is being foisted upon Guyanese that is incapable on its own of promoting unity and patriotism. And that I have a problem with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lucas. Of course, it was a privilege having you on this program. I am one of your former students who sat on you, so it's a big deal for me to have you here today, and I definitely enjoyed the conversation that we had. I mean, there are a lot more things that we could have dealt with, but I do believe that this will not be your last appearance, so we'll work on it and see to get you to come on to deal with some other issues, because we know that you have, a wide scope of knowledge on different issues. So I want to thank you once again for joining Facing the Nation today.
Thank you very much for having me. Shanika.
You're
It's a pleasure.
welcome. To my viewers, I want to thank you once again for joining the program today. And of course, next week, I definitely have a treat for you. Next week, I have a guest who to quite a few topics next week. So don't forget to tell a friend, family member. Don't miss us next week, 12:30 to 1:30 on all the social media platforms and of course on Channel 6. Do have a splendid weekend.